Hello, hello, and greetings, peace, and power and elevation be to all of you. So it's your girl Tiffany coming through here live in effect. And today's topic, first of all, Ramadan Mubarak to everybody out there. I hope you guys have a safe Ramadan. I hope you guys enjoyed your Ramadan. All right. So today's topic, I will be discussing about a Sufi order that was started in Senegal but was brought to Moncks, South Carolina. All right. So it's called the Mustafawiyya Sufi order. So it's called the Tariqa Mustafawiyya. All right. And the people that are the petitioner are known as the Mustafi or Mustafawi. All right. So before I continue, make sure you like and subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, share the channel, and all that great stuff. Okay. All right. So make sure you guys like the channel, share the channel, and subscribe to the channel, etc. All right. So just go ahead and get started. So I want to be able to go ahead and share some information, articles about the Mustafawiyya and who was Sheikh Mustapha, Haydar, Gueye, and also, just history about Moncks, South Carolina. Okay. So make sure you like and subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, share the channel, etc. Okay. Um, so the article that I am going to be posting, if I can get to it. All right, so the title of this article is called History and Memory in the Muslim Community Amongst Corner by Yusuf Carter. All right, so you guys should check out Yusuf Carter. I was looking at some of his lecture before I even started this video. Pretty decent lecture that he done, okay? But anyways, so he written this article back in 2017. And it says, encircle around Sheikh Arana Faye in the dining hall of Masjid Mahajrum while Ansar of Monk's Corner. A dozen or so students listened intently as he recounted a story of resistance and spiritual power about one of his ancestors, Abdullah and Shesuddin, told to him by Sheikh Muhammad Mustapha Gueye Haydar, which describes the measure taken to avoid capture by Spanish slavers in Mediterranean. All right, so it says that Monk's Corner is located about 30 to 40 minutes driving distance from Charleston. Let me see. Okay, so it says Moss Corner is located about 30 to 40 minutes driving distance from Charleston, a port city through which a significant portion of all enslaved Africans were forcibly brought into the American South during the American slave trade. Okay. All right, so according to the article, I'm trying to see if I can. Hold on, give me a second, guys. Let me adjust the screen. I'm trying to get this screen adjusted. Okay. Okay, okie dokie, okie dokie. Now I'm back. Okay, cool. So, right here, going back to the information, says such a narration illustrates the manner in which secretive knowledge and spiritual power passed down from within Sheikh Faye's lineage provides a backdrop for discussing resistance to the bodily disempowerment of slavery in the diasporic context. It should be obvious that the telling of this story by a West African marabout to his family and imparted to a predominantly African American audience in the American South is particularly meaningful insofar as they have various relationships to the historical legacy of chattel enslavement. And therefore, this scene is an example of how collective memory in religious context emerges amongst Muslims of varying African descent. Okay? So, Moncks Corner and diasporic emergence. All right? So, that's the picture of the Sheikh. It says Moncks Corner, South Carolina is a blue collar town about 30 to 40 minutes away. I don't have to repeat that. All right. So it's sit northwest of the city of Charleston, South Carolina, and is home to a small but robust community of African American, West African, and a few Anglo American Muslims who comprise their major North American contingent of a transnational Sufi order that originates in the majority Muslim country of Senegal. This order has spread to a number of locations that includes major American cities such as Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., and Atlanta, as well as within Senegal, Gambia, Morocco, Mauritania, Indonesia, and Spain. These Muslims are members of the Mustafawiyya Tariqa, which was conceived in 1966 by the late Sheikh Muhammad Mustapha Gueye Hadira in is it I think it's pronounced as T's a Tay. I think it's pronounced as Tay Senegal. And brought over to the United States in 1994 by his protege, Sheikh Arona Faye Al Fakir. All right. So the author basically goes in to say that the visionate I share above centers upon the participation in West African Islamic pedagogies, which are understood as routes through which varying forms of historic ruptures among Muslims of African descent are addressed. Further, it is through this means that specific paths are remembered and others forgotten, and meanings are placed within image or imagine kinships and practices of remembrance of African American Muslims, which form the largest group of students in North America, right? And it says, alongside their Senegalese and Gambian counterparts, by looking at specific interaction among the Muslims of Moncks Corner with regard to how they rely upon spiritual care and esoteric knowledge to collectively reckon with the historical legacy of forced migration westward and the ever-present reminder of enslavement. I offer a glimpse into the manner in which Sufi networks impact the cultivation of religious identities and diaspora emergencies. This phenomenon occurs through the utilization of the Moncks Corner Mosque as a space of diasporic identity construction, which makes possible the disposition of dispensation of spiritual care that I argue simultaneously addresses personal growth and collective historical trauma for African American Muslims in particular. All right. So before I continue on, people do not understand that, one of the first to come here were the African enslaved Muslims, right? Now, many of us may assume that they were Sunni Muslims, but it's probably not necessarily the case. You know what I'm saying? So what we see here is that it was not only the Sunni Muslim, but also those who was into Sufi knowledge. And see, we have to be careful with those who use a lot of confirmation bias when it comes to the story about Islam, because the first thing they'll say, they'll condemn Islam from a negative point of view because of the bad reputation that it received, but they don't look at all facets of all corners. So you have to be careful with certain individuals when they make condemnation about it. All right. So yes, there was a vast majority of our ancestors who was practicing Islam. A vast majority of our people. All right. So that's like probably like 50%. So when they came here, they were already Muslim. So you had more than that was into Islamic practice than they were into Christianity. Okay. And in this case, with this particular Sufi order, right, it was a way to reconnect back to their ancestral roots. And even with the Ahmadiyya, right, the Ahmadiyya movement, which was taking place around the 20s, okay, so they were really not Sufi Muslim, they're more so Sunni like. However, they had a major influence on the Muslims in Philadelphia and in Detroit, especially. Okay, so in the African American community and parts of St. Louis, Missouri. All right, you know what I mean. And then when we have to look at the history, when we have to look at the history about the Nation Islam, the Moorish Temple of America, and even the Five Percenters. Okay, if you connect the dot, they roots go back to, it will go back to more of Sufi Islam and Masonic ideology in combination. So what I'm saying is the Nation Islam, the Nation of Gods on the Earth, and the Moorish Temple of America came about the school of Sufi Islamic doctrine. Okay, they came about the school of Sunni Islamic doctrine and Masonic principles, or the Shriners. All right, I mean, you could see the connection there. So, and I'm gonna say this to everybody, okay, especially about the Nation of Gods on Earth. They're nothing more than a watered down version of Sufi Islam. That's all they are, Sufi Islam. They practicing that, but they practicing what I would call the street Sufi. That's what I would call it. They practice the street version of Sufi Islam. It's just a watered down version of it. That's it. And what they don't realize is they practicing the esoteric concept. Esoteric Gnosticism. Okay, so their teaching is combined with esoteric knowledge and Gnosticism. But let me continue with the video. All right. Woo. Let me see. All right. So down here, let's go down to where they said, I posed that the multiple iteration of African American Muslim bodily practice, which are informed by West African pedagogical approaches to religious observance and spiritual knowledge as they emerge amongst the Mustafawiyya in South Carolina, cannot be analyzed unless it is against the backdrop of his histories of transatlantic dispersion and partially motivated by narratives of lost identities in the Moncks Corner Mosque. Therefore, the voyages of African American Muslims from the United States to Senegal for either spiritually motivated visitation or religious learning should be understood as processes of reconnection that are constructed by such discourses in which they participate and mobilize through the placement of network nodes on either side of the Atlantic. Okay? Now, it talks about the history of South Carolina and Moncks Corner Mosque. It says, but you see that in bold print, it's already in the paragraph. All right, so it says, it is by driving into Moncks Corner, South Carolina, that reveals to the visitor the manner in which the history of enslavement seems to linger as a ghost that cannot be shoved neatly into the pages of school textbooks. This ever-present phantom hunts the many acres of cotton fields between the dogwood trees that sways into the swift breeze created by automobiles driven along the highways and back roads that lead into and out of town. A present that the traveler cannot miss. It is a legacy as was it explicable. Well, I'm gonna skip that word, but it is a legacy by plays that dot the town commission by the city's historical society and implied by every other street sign that reads Plantation Lane or Plantation Road or some iteration thereof. Therefore, the landscape itself utters a hushed narrative of black subjugation via enslavement, which is inescapable. All right. So going down, Omar ibn Said, a Senegalese Muslim scholar, was enslaved and brought to the United States through Charleston in 1807 and would be enslaved for the remainder of his life. It is examples like this that provides a point of departure for thinking about discourses of loss and rapture that occur in Moncks Corner Mosque as members. Okay. Some who have relocated from northern urban centers discuss the legacy of enslaved African Muslims in the American South and participate in envisioning themselves returning to Senegal as they travel abroad. Okay. Now, it says Monk's Corner Mosque was originally located closer to downtown, first on Carolina Avenue in a residential area not far from the center of town, and later on 304 East Main Street, which is adjacent to the town's banking section. Okay. Then it goes down to say, however, the mosque was moved away due to a rental dispute with its landlord, from whom the building was being leased, and is currently situated on the land that was formerly a slave plantation. Jippy Plantation is set aside Old Highway 52, which is a two-lane road that it shares with the mosque. Most of the land that comprise Gippy Plantation that has partitioned into mostly residential property, yet in spite of its shrinking fencing and signage imposed themselves quite thoroughly in line of sight from mosque property. In my talks with some of the men at the mosque, they brought up approximate histories regarding enslavement of African descended people in that very place. While they held varying degrees of adequate acquaintance with the local history of enslavement, it was quite apparent that the memory of enslavement and the subsequent identification as descendants of enslaved Africans lived on in the minds of African American Muslims with whom I spoke. In other words, the trauma of enslavement, perhaps exacerbated by more recent national discourse around institutionalized racism and police violence, is something that indeed has an afterlife. In my time spent with Abdul Rashid Waston, one of Sheikh Faye's more advanced African American disciple, originally from Philadelphia, he has frequently shared with me that he sometimes imagined how enslaved Africans were marched up and down Old Highway 52. All right, so according to the author, the masjid is located in an area that is known as the slave plantation called Jippy's Plantation. Okay, so that's where the mosque is at today, and so that's a very interesting history to know. Okay, um, what we see as well. So what we see here, also going further down, it says, in fact, during one of the slower days during my time conducting research at the mosque in Monk's Corner, Abdul Rashid and I visited the nearby history museum in town. The Berkeley County Heritage Museum, located in the town's old Canal Santee Park, traces its role as a southern location in American history. We had both visited the location prior, although it had been a few years since I had last walked into that exhibit. Abdul Rashid noting the museum use of terms such as planters as opposed to slaveholders, and the central focus on white landowners instead of the enslaved people who actually did the planting and harvesting, indicated his awareness of the creeping and subtle difference regarding narrative that most contemporary historians share about a difficult past. All right. So it says a heritage of strategic forgetting. What has been outlined thus far marks a subtle dissonance between past and present, as represented by the town of Moncks Corner and its resident, particularly its Muslim community, which is composed mainly of African descended people. On one hand, the physically imposing Jippy plantation located near the Moncks Corner Mosque highlights a geographic erasure of access to historical memory, as significant portion of it are converted to suburban housing. Land historically harvested by the forced labor of black hands to be later washed, whitewashed by the momentum of economic development. Additionally, there also is the question of the crude fencing that resists entry. It is made quite obvious that Jiffy Plantation, from its signage to its security measure, is private property. For past owner, the plantation was a source of wealth, and for others, a source of economic and bodily disposition. Therefore, it is ironic and meaningful that a mosque filled with Muslims of African descent devoted to spiritual empowerment would be placed on a land where enslaved, which some of were Muslim, years ago were disempowered. Hmm. Wow. So that's this information from the article. Okay. Basically, he goes into the source. All right. The source that he gives is Sivian Juoff, who I recommend you guys. And then there's a book called Balahi Muhammad, the Muslim Jurisprudence in Antebellum, Georgia. All right. So it's a lot of information on here. Um, Great information, great source, very historical information. All right. So with that being said, I recommend you guys to look into Yusuf Carter. He has a video on YouTube where he gives a presentation, and I think he does a phenomenal job with that. Now, also, there's something I want to read to y'all. It's a prayer by Sheikh Mustapha Gueye. Now, yes, his last name is pronounced as Gay, like Gay, Gay. Okay, so he's Senegalese, and a lot of them have French name and Fulani name, Wolof names, etc. Okay, so anyhow, when you go down to here, let's look at this information. It's called Prayer of Unveiling, right? So it says, Salam and greeting of peace. Allah unveils, unveiling with light. As you are the remover of coverings, remove my veil. Allah expands things, extending his benefits. As you are the expander, expand my contentment. Allah heals imperceptibly, restoring to health. As you are the healer, heal my debility. Allah give prolifically, providing substance abundantly. As you give profusely, let my satisfaction overflow. Allah is acknowledged as the sovereign, with open hands to accept oaths. As you are the one who accepts oaths of loyalty, let every atom of my being be loyal to you. All right, and this came from his book called The Removal of Coverings, which came, I don't know, it don't say what year that it came about, but it does say what year he was born. He was born in 1926 and he died in 1989. Okay. So, but this came from a book called The Remover of Coverings. And so you can find this on darvish.wordpress.com. This is the website. All right. And also, so I came across a dissertation by Jason Carter. It's called The Paths of Remembrance, Memory, Pilgrimage, and Transmission in Transatlantic Sufi Community. So let me show you guys real quick. Let me show you the dissertation. So here's the dissertation that was done. So this person has a doctor of philosophy and anthropology. I believe it's probably the author that I read previously, whose name is Yusuf Carter. So, but his government name is Jason Carter. That's what I'm assuming. I could be wrong. Okay. All right. So I'm gonna read some of that information and see what he's talking about on here. All right. So let's get into the part where he talk about black Muslimness. Hmm. Hmm. All right, so it's under. All right. Mm, all right. Oh goodness. Hold on. All right. So here it is. It says the continuities and contours of Black Muslimness. So it says the study of Islam in the West seems to have had its beginning as a political projective disguised as a sociological one. Initially prompted in many ways with a fascination with the mid 20th century influx of North African and Middle Eastern Muslim migrants to Europe. So let me show y'all the dissertation real quick. All right, so it says, going back to what I was reading, the study of Islam in the West seems to have had its beginning as a political project disguised as sociological one, initially prompted in many ways with a fascination with the mid 20th century influx of North African and Middle Eastern Muslim migrants to Europe and United States. The study of Muslims shifted from Eastern rural environments to Western urban ones, whereby the study of particular groups display an historical colonial relationship. Perhaps, unfortunately, the study of Islam in the West has focused largely on the nature of the acculturation of migrants in their hostland, in which in many cases, the impetus to understand the daily lives and political identity of Muslims was a veil for measuring the possibility of assimilating foreign bodies politicized by forms of differences and societal exclusion into a Western cultural and political landscape. Moreover, this motive is at least partly propelled by long-standing remnants of essentialist understanding of who Muslims are, with the assumption that their agendas, political views, and desire are at once monolithic and radically different from Western secular ones. Consequently, it seems as though much of what has been written on Muslims in Europe and North America has been funneled into either political or ethnic studies. Much writing on Islam in the West has understood the contemporary political landscape in a way that renders further Muslim as anti-secular, outsider, and irrational warmonger. So the events of September 11th of 2001 stands out as a watershed that marks a heightened surveillance of Muslim bodies and has overdetermined Muslims as foreign similarity to the manner in which older anti-Islamic rhetorics have. And so let's skip down to where it says there are numerous works that have collectively provided a historical analysis of African American Muslim life and practices, and yet some early works can be characterized as an exercise in understanding what is particularly Black about being a Black Muslim, with seemingly less focus on spirituality. All right. So then it goes on to say many African Americans disillusioned by the nonviolent ethos of the civil rights movement leadership and also profoundly impacted by both the public rectitude and political clarity of Malcolm X and the Nation of Islam transitioned throughout the 20th century to Islam through multiple roles, orthodox and otherwise. However, the popularity and visibility of the Nation of Islam in the mid-late 20th century resulted in a lack of emphasis on African American Muslims who were unaffiliated with the Nation of Islam and had been overshadowed by its organization, reach, and visibility. Okay? Accordingly, groups like Darul Islam and the Islamic Party in North America, through which the majority of its African American organizational members converted to Islam beyond the bounds of the Nation of Islam, and also expressed very political postures in addition to religious interpretation, remain a footnote in the collective historical memory of who African American Muslims were and are. All right. So, just pretty much just giving the idea of that. Now, going back up here, let's look at the Black Atlantic religion. Okay. Um, and it says traveling OD of the Fakir, Suleiman and Halima's Daydream. All right. So again, I'm assuming that this came from the same author, Yusuf Carter, but he used his government name, Jason Carter. So let's look at the Black Atlantic religion. So let's go down here. All right, right down here it says, while it is true that most of the circulation within Mustafawiyya network takes place around the Atlantic, mostly due to the placement of network nodes, and that the notion of a Black Atlantic has provided a rich instrument for understanding emerging diasporic affinities and regional identity, it is also true that the Atlantic itself has provided a means for understanding exactly the routes of Black religious community. At the same time, the placement of these nodes is not solely the motive for the specific pathways and routes of mobility that are mapped within the larger network. It is also the historical legacy of forced migration and enslavement that has initiated intercontinental dispersion of African descent and resulted in the firm embedding of peoples onto and into the western side of the Atlantic. In other words, while the recent migration seems that begin in Senegal and end in South Carolina are mainly motivated by post-colonial migration and ethno-religious solidarities, the patterns of mobility that begin in South Carolina and end in Senegal can be understood as simultaneously situated in a historical narrative involving prior transatlantic route of enslavement and contemporary religious pilgrimage, imprinted onto discourses of this dispersion and return. However, we should not stop there. It is vital to understand these patterns as emerging, shifting, and responsive to network growth and contraction. In other words, these migration and pilgrimage are continuous as they facilitate the circulation of identities and knowledge back and forth across the Atlantic Ocean. And then it goes on to say, some works that have used the Black Atlantic as a device for better understanding the flows and migration of peoples and tradition that circulate around it have placed so much emphasis on traditional African religiosity. However, Sorrell and Blaine argues that the focus on transnationalism has perhaps overstayed the presence of tradition like Santeria and Candabale in the exchange between Lasso America and continental Africa. They depart from this trend by firmly placing African Christianity, particularly in its post-colonial formation, as more central to the discussion of the circulist African tradition around the Atlantic. For my own purpose, though, I situate the religion of Islam, particularly in its West African configuration, as central to my own usage of the Black Atlantic in describing the circuits of exchange and transmission that take place between Muslims of African descent on either side of the ocean. In doing so, both Paul Gilroy's and J. Laurent Mortuary's works are what is it? Instructive in that they led us to consider how both African American practices within a Senegalese Sufi tradition and the Senegalese institution in which African American participate are reciprocally shifted by their combined presence. In other words, why African American Muslim in Moncks Corner are profoundly transformed by the process of religious learning transmitted from within a specific West African Islamic pedagogical approach. Those process and Senegalese Muslims themselves are profoundly impacted by the cultural expectation and spiritual needs of African American Muslim in the Tariqa. All right. So basically, to sum it all up, right, there's the connection that's being drawn with Sufi Islam. So basically, as I mentioned, that many African American Muslims that get into the Sufi Islamic doctrine, right, they're reconnecting back to where their ancestors practiced Islam. Now, not all our ancestors were Sufi. There were those of them that were Sunni Muslims. But, Sufi is also a part of the Sunni culture anyhow. Okay, Sufi is the Sunni culture. Okay, it's a branch of Sufi. Sufism is a branch of Sunni Islam. So it's just deal with the esoteric concept of Sunni Islamic doctrine. That's all it is. And so our people found a way to reconnect. And also what you're gonna know, or what you have not noticed, maybe some of you are not a big fan of jazz, but you'll notice that a lot of Muslims are into jazz music. That you'll see a lot of jazz musicians that are Muslim. Why is that? Because music was very common in the Sufi order. You know what I'm saying? It was very common. It's very common in West Africa, period. But especially those in the Sufi order is real common. All right. So when you go and look up the Gunagwa people, right? The Gunagwa people, they were very big on music. So even during a time of being under the Berber and the Arabs enslavement, they used music as a way to bring about the liberation. So it's very common in the Black Muslim community that you would have a lot of Muslims that are into jazz music, right? And not only that's into jazz, but also into R&B, hip hop, and things like that. But they contribute a lot into music, all right? So Sufi Muslims, especially, they get into the concept of music. They do a lot of chanting. They do a lot of singing, praising, etc. That's what they do. Okay. Now, in some Sunni doctrine, is haram, to get into secular music. It's very haram. So that's what they teach. So music is not lawful in the Islamic culture, and according to the Sunni doctrine. If you practicing like the strict form of Sunni, like if you under the traditional where they pretty much don't accept music, but then there's some culture that do accept it. And if you go back and study about the Islamic jurisprudence of Sunni Islam, right, you study about the Maliki and Hanafiya school. The Maliki and Hanafiya school, pretty much they're more contemporary, and they accept traditional practices, you know what I'm saying, as long as it's not too extreme, it's not going far against the sunnah. But they don't have a problem with people practicing their own custom, their own tradition, and things of that nature. So what we learned there is a lot of people that are into the Hanafi and the Maliki school of thoughts. All right. So anyways, um that's it. That's all that I have. Let's see, do I have any books available? And I do. Yes, I have one book that I'm going to recommend people to look into. Ooh, let me. So this book is called Embodying Black Religions in Africa and Its Diaspora. Yolanda Covington Ward and Jeanette S. Julie, which is called The Embodied Black Religion in Africa and Its Diaspora. Okay. So you got different authors, and you also got the editors in those books that mention that. So I'm gonna just show you guys the cover of the book. Let's see. See if I can show the cover real quick. All right, so that's the cover right there, embodying. Yeah, that's the cover. It's called Embodying Black Religion in Africa and its Diaspora. Right. All right. So, anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed that video. And I hope y'all have a good one. And I hope you enjoy your Ramadan. Break your fast in peace. Go ahead, get your Maghrib prayer going, or is it Isha? One of them is either Maghrib. I think it's Maghrib prayer because it's still sunset out there. So it's still kind of light. So yeah, it's Maghrib. But make sure you guys break your fast in peace, and make sure you guys enjoy yourself. And if you're in the masjid, go ahead and spend your time in the mosque and listen to the imam and all of that. So again, Ramadan Mubarak to all you people. Ramadan Kareem. Until next time, peace and power elevation. This your girl Tiffany, and I'm out. Thank you. And Assalamu alaikum.